What I'd like to offer today is a reflection on the debate you've been exposed to in this class dealing with the implications of Atlantic piracy for how we view the Royal Navy, naval power, and state power in the 18th century. The course asks you to contemplate both the bureaucratic reach and governmental legitimacy of the British state, especially at sea and in coastal communities. Both camps you've been exposed to think that piracy and the state-sponsored campaign to delegitimize it shed light on the nature of the British state and on the mercantile and legal beliefs of British subjects. When commenting on Atlantic piracy, historians habitually use the 1720s as a line of demarcation signaling an endpoint, a transition from the golden age of piracy to a golden age of privateering. To these historians, people like Rediker and Ritchie and Starkey, this shift reflected the growth of British naval command in the Atlantic world as British officials on land and sea used the Royal Navy, the Customs Service, and the courts to confront, chase, capture, and execute pirates. In the first decade of the 18th century, according to this view, naval policing was expanded to the Atlantic and the Caribbean with demonstrable success in suppressing piracy and turning public opinion against pirates and their commercial and political backers. The Royal Navy functioned as an effective police force, which in the course of a single generation, from the late 1690s to the 1720s, transformed the Atlantic from a wild, violent frontier into an orderly setting for maritime commerce. So this is the current understanding, or the reigning understanding of the chronology of piracy's demise. And the timing of this development indicates how and why it took place, rapidly through confrontation at sea and port. So the significance of this field of study has to do with the power and legitimacy of the British state. According to this reigning view, Britain policed and pacified the ocean by force. It brought local courts and local office holders into compliance with Parliament. And it changed the commercial and ethical habits of consumers, converting them from enablers and supporters of piracy to enemies of piracy, converting them from communities that ignored imperial law to communities that internalized and adhered to it. When I started my research on this, my aim was to follow this narrative and analyze the mechanics of this civilizing conquest of the ocean and coastal towns. But I didn't find strong evidence to support this thesis. What I found instead is that, first, piracy was not suppressed. And when it did disappear in the 1830s and 40s, it was not due to naval policing. Economic forces made it less profitable, especially following the outbreak of a stable peace in 1815. Second, the practice of marine insurance actually bolstered piracy by insulating merchants from piracy-related losses. And third, the public remained happily complicit in piratical activity in the 18th century, just as it had been in the 17th. Despite increasingly harsh anti-piracy legislation, the Atlantic in the 18th century and the early 19th century remained a wild frontier in which armed commerce was the norm, not the exception. And this last issue, the distance between law and practice, is what I'd like to discuss today. So first, I will briefly outline the growing distance between statutory law and commercial practice at sea and port. Second, I'll point out that this distance between imperial law and commercial practice corresponded with the distance between the seat of government and the myriad locations of commercial activity. Government's efforts to bridge this ethical gap between law and practice therefore involved attempts to bridge the geographic gap as well by thickening central governance and diluting local governance in distant jurisdictions and at sea. Last, I will suggest that we should understand statutory law on piracy as a form of propaganda regarding the reach of state authority. So we should see it as a proclamation of the British government's policy aspirations, a proclamation of its presumptions to jurisdiction and influence in peripheral communities. Such propaganda remained unconvincing under a government that demonstrated to constituents daily that it did not have the ability to enforce the law.